Have you ever risked everything to do the right thing, thinking no one was watching? Cassidy Tate did. She was just a waitress at a high-end Chicago bistro, barely scraping by when she saw a manager screaming at a terrified, mute little girl. Cassidy didn't care about her paycheck. She cared about the child. She stepped in, took the abuse, and got fired on the spot. But she didn't know that the little girl wasn't alone. Sitting in the shadows was her father, Dominic Valenti, the city's most feared Mafia boss. And what he did next didn't just change Cassidy's life, it burned the whole restaurant to the ground. This is the story of how one act of kindness sparked a brutal war and a legendary romance. The lunchtime rush at the Gilded Spoon was not for the faint of heart. Located in the heart of downtown Chicago, just off Michigan Avenue, it was the kind of place where politicians shook hands with real estate tycoons and where the coffee cost more than most people's hourly wage. Cassidy Tate wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, balancing a tray of espressos and truffle fries. Her feet ached. They always ached. At 24, she felt 40. Between the rent on her shoebox apartment in the South Loop and the medical bills for her mother's dialysis, Cassidy was drowning. But she needed this job. The tips were good, provided you could stomach the clientele and the management. Tate Table 6 is waving. Are you blind or just stupid? The voice cut through the clatter of silverware like a rusted saw. Gavin Thorne, the floor manager, stood by the POS station. His face flushed a perpetually angry red. Gavin was a petty tyrant in a cheap polyester suit, a man who derived his only joy in life from making the waitstaff cry. "I'm on it, Gavin," Cassidy said, keeping her voice level. She had learned long ago that arguing only gave him fuel. "Sir, it's sir to you," Gavin sneered, checking his fake Rolex. "Move it." Cassidy swallowed her pride, adjusted her apron, and moved. She was used to bullies. She had dealt with them her whole life. But today the atmosphere in the restaurant felt heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on her arms stand up. It started when the black SUV pulled up. Not the usual Ubers or town cars, but a heavy armored Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows so dark they looked like oil slicks. A large man in a tailored charcoal suit had entered first, scanning the room with eyes that missed nothing. He had requested a corner booth, table 4, the most secluded spot in the house. He was joined by a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She wore a pristine velvet dress and white tights, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, neat bun. She looked like a porcelain doll, and she was just as silent. Cassidy had served them their water. The man who had introduced himself simply as Mr. Davis, though he wore a diamond pinky ring that cost more than the restaurant had taken a phone call, and stepped outside to the patio, leaving the girl alone with a coloring book. "Keep an eye on her." The man had grunted to Gavin before stepping out. Gavin had preened, promising the VIP guest the world. But the moment the man stepped outside, Gavin went back to scrolling on his phone near the bar, ignoring the child completely. Cassidy watched table 4 from the corner of her eye, while she bussed table 9. The little girl Bella, she heard the man call her earlier, was trying to pour herself a glass of water from the heavy crystal carafe. Cassidy took a step forward to help, but a customer at table 7 grabbed her arm. "Miss, my soup is cold." "I'm so sorry, let me crash." The sound shattered the lunchtime murmur. Cassidy spun around. At table 4, the heavy crystal carafe lay in shards on the floor. Water soaked the white tablecloth and dripped onto the expensive hardwood. The little girl Bella stood, frozen. Her hands were trembling violently, clutching the edge of the table. Her eyes were wide, filled with a panic so raw it broke Cassidy's heart instantly. The girl opened her mouth, but no sound came out. What in the hell is going on here? Gavin Thorne stormed across the dining room, his shoes crunching on the broken glass. He loomed over the child, his face twisted in fury. "Look at this mess!" Gavin shouted, not caring that the entire restaurant had gone quiet. "Do you know how much that carafe costs? Do you—" The girl shrank back, shaking her head. She pointed to her throat, tears welling in her large, dark eyes. "I don't care!" Gavin yelled, slamming his hand on the table. The cutlery jumped. "Where are your parents? Leaving a brat alone to destroy my dining room? You're going to pay for this, or you're going to get out." He reached out, grabbing the terrified girl's upper arm, roughly to pull her away from the mess. That was when Cassidy snapped. She didn't think about her rent. She didn't think about her mum's medical bills. She didn't think about the fact that Gavin had the power to blacklist her from every restaurant in the city. She dropped the tray she was holding. It hit the floor with a deafening clang, but she was already moving. She crossed the distance in 3 strides and shoved herself between Gavin and the child. "Get your hands off her!" Cassidy's voice rang out clear and fierce. Gavin stumbled back, shocked. He released the girl and stared at Cassidy. "Excuse me, Tate, have you lost your mind?" "She's a child, Gavin." Cassidy stood her ground, spreading her arms to shield Bella, who immediately buried her face in Cassidy's apron, sobbing silently. Cassidy could feel the girl's small frame shaking against her leg. "It was an accident. She was trying to pour water because you were too busy playing on your phone to do your job." The restaurant was dead silent. Every fork was down. Every eye was watching. Gavin's face turned a shade of purple Cassidy had never seen before. His authority was being challenged in front of the lunch crowd. "You listen to me, you piece of trash!" Gavin hissed, stepping into Cassidy's personal space. "You are a waitress. You are nothing. You don't tell me how to run my floor. Move aside so I can kick this brat out, or you're finished." Cassidy felt the fear coiling in her stomach, but she looked down at the little girl clinging to her. She put a hand on Bella's head, smoothing her hair. "No," Cassidy said, her voice shaking slightly, but her chin held high. "I'm not moving, and if you touch her again, I'm calling the police." Gavin laughed, a cruel barking sound. "The police? For what, managing my restaurant? You're fired, Tate. Get out, right now, and take the mute freak with you." "She's not a freak," Cassidy snapped. "She's a liability," Gavin roared, raising his hand as if to gesture wildly, but the movement was aggressive, threatening. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The voice didn't come from Cassidy. It didn't come from the kitchen. It came from the patio doorway. The voice was low, smooth, and colder than liquid nitrogen. It carried a weight that made the air in the room feel suddenly thin. Gavin froze, his hand still raised. Cassidy turned her head. Standing in the doorway was the man from the SUV. But now, looking at him fully, Cassidy realized he wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He had taken off his sunglasses. His eyes were the color of steel, and they were fixed on Gavin with a predatory intensity that made Cassidy's blood run cold. Behind him, 2 other men had appeared. They didn't look like customers. They looked like soldiers. The man walked slowly toward table 4. His footsteps were heavy, deliberate. The silence in the room was suffocating. Mr. Davis," Gavin stammered, his bravado evaporating instantly. I was just handling a situation. This waitress caused a scene, and your daughter, my daughter—" The man interrupted, stopping 3 feet from Gavin. He didn't look at Cassidy yet. He looked only at the manager. "My daughter dropped a water jug." "Yes, exactly." Gavin nodded frantically, sweating profusely. "She made a mess, and I was just trying to—" "You grabbed her," the man said. It wasn't a question. "I was escorting her." The man finally turned his gaze to Cassidy. For a second, Cassidy thought she was in trouble too. His eyes scanned her, noting the protective hand, she still had on Bella's shoulder. He looked at his daughter, who was no longer crying, but was looking up at Cassidy with a look of absolute trust. The man looked back at Gavin. "My name isn't Davis," he said softly. He reached into his jacket pocket. Gavin flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, the man pulled out a silk handkerchief. He stepped forward, bypassed Gavin entirely, and knelt down in front of Bella. "Bella!" he said, his voice instantly changing to something gentle. "Are you hurt?" Bella shook her head. She pointed at Gavin. Then she pointed at Cassidy, and then she made a sign with her hands. She clasped her hands over her heart. The man nodded. He stood up slowly. He turned to Gavin. "My name is Dominic Valenti." The sound of the name sucked the oxygen out of the room. A woman at table 3 audibly gasped. Even Cassidy, who didn't follow the crime news, closely knew that name. Dominic Valenti, the head of the Valenti crime family, the man who effectively ran the Chicago shipping yards, the construction unions, and half the nightclubs in the Loop. He was a ghost story whispered in back alleys, and Gavin Thorne had just assaulted his daughter. Gavin's face went white. He looked like he was going to vomit. "Mr. Valenti, I had no idea. Please, You called her a freak," Dominic said. He adjusted his cufflinks. "And you fired the only person in this room with a spine." Dominic signaled to the 2 men behind him. "Remove him." "Wait, no, please!" Gavin shrieked as the 2 large men grabbed him by the arms. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Don't apologize to me," Dominic said, turning his back on him. "And you're right about one thing. This waitress is fired, because she's leaving with me." The restaurant was paralyzed. It was like a scene from a movie, except the smell of fear coming off Gavin Thorne was very real. As the guards dragged the screaming manager toward the back exit, wisely avoiding the front, where witnesses with phones might be Dominic Valenti, turned his full attention to Cassidy. Cassidy's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She took a half step back, her instinct to flee, warring with the fact that Bella was still holding onto her apron. Mr. Valenti's horse." Cassidy started her voice, trembling. "I don't want any trouble. I just didn't want him to hurt her." Dominic studied her. Up close, he was terrifyingly handsome. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow, interrupting the perfect symmetry of his face. He radiated power, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. "You risked your livelihood for a stranger," Dominic said. "Why?" "It was the right thing to do," Cassidy said, lifting her chin. "I don't care who her father is. No one grabs a child like that." Dominic's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was analyzing a complex equation. Most people in this city look the other way when things get difficult. "You didn't." He glanced down at Bella. The little girl tugged on his tailored suit jacket and signed something rapidly with her hands. Dominic watched her, his expression softening into a look of profound sadness and love. "She says you smell like vanilla and that you were brave like a knight," Dominic translated, looking back at Cassidy. "Bella doesn't like people. She doesn't touch people. But she's holding on to you." Cassidy looked down. Bella offered a shy, tentative smile. "I need to go," Cassidy said, panic rising again. "I need to get my things. I'm fired anyway." "You are," Dominic agreed, "but you're hired elsewhere." "Excuse me." "My daughter needs a governess, a caretaker, someone who isn't afraid of bullies, someone who doesn't treat her like she's broken because she chooses not to speak." Dominic reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. It was black with gold embossing. "My last 3 nannies quit. They were afraid of me, or they had no patience for her. You have both." Cassidy laughed nervously. "Mr. Valenti, with all due respect, I'm a waitress. I barely finished community college. I'm not a governess." "I don't need a degree. I need loyalty, and I need someone who protects what is mine." He stepped closer, lowering his voice, so only she could hear. "The pay is 10,000 a month, cash, plus room and board at the estate." Cassidy choked. 10,000. That was more than she made in 6 months. It would pay for her mother's treatment. It would pay off her debts. It would change everything. "But," Dominic added, his eyes darkening, "once you come into my world, Cassidy, there is no revolving door. You are in or you are out. My life is complicated, dangerous." Cassidy looked at the business card, then at Bella. The little girl looked at her with pleading eyes. Then she looked at the empty spot where Gavin had been standing. She had nothing left here. No job, no money, and an eviction notice waiting on her kitchen counter. "I have a sick mother," Cassidy said softly. "I need to be able to care for her." "We have the best private doctors on retainer," Dominic said instantly. "She will be taken care of. Better than any hospital in the state." It was an offer from the devil. She knew it. Every instinct screamed that getting into a car with a Mafia boss was a one-way ticket to a short life. But looking at Dominic, she didn't see a monster. She saw a desperate father. "When do I start?" she whispered. "Now." Dominic turned to the gawking patrons of the Gilded Spoon. "Lunch is on me," he announced to the room. "Everyone forget what you saw here today. Enjoy your meal." He placed a hand on Cassidy's back, a warm, firm pressure that sent a jolt of electricity down her spine and guided her toward the door. As they walked out into the blinding Chicago sunlight, the heavy door of the Escalade was held open by another guard. Cassidy climbed in the leather seat, cool against her legs. Bella scrambled in next to her, buckling herself in and immediately opening her coloring book on Cassidy's lap. Dominic sat opposite them. As the car pulled away, merging into the heavy traffic of Michigan Avenue, he poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter built into the door. "You have no idea what you just walked into." "Miss Tate," he murmured, taking a sip of amber liquid. "I think I can handle myself," Cassidy said, trying to sound braver than she felt. Dominic smiled. It was a dark, dangerous smile that made her breath catch. "We'll see. Because the man who runs that restaurant, Gavin Thorne, he's a nobody. But the man who owns the building, the man whose money Thorne washes, that's Mickey O'Shea, the head of the Irish mob. And you just humiliated his nephew in public." Cassidy's blood went cold. "Gavin is O'Shea's nephew?" "Yes." Dominic looked out the window, his jaw tight. "You started a war today, Cassidy. I hope you're ready to fight it." The car sped up, heading toward the highway, toward the Valenti estate, and away from the only life Cassidy had ever known. The drive to the Valenti estate took 40 minutes, leading them out of the chaotic noise of the city and into the rolling wooded hills of Lake Forest. The transition from urban grit to manicured wealth was jarring. They passed through a massive wrought-iron gate that stood at least 12 feet high. Security cameras buzzed and rotated as the Escalade swept through. Cassidy noticed men patrolling the perimeter, men with earpieces and bulges under their jackets that were unmistakably firearms. "This isn't a house," Cassidy whispered, looking out the window. "It's a fortress." "It has to be," Dominic replied without looking up from his phone. The car stopped in front of a sprawling limestone mansion that looked like it had been airlifted from the French countryside. It was beautiful, but cold. There were no tricycles on the lawn, no flowers in the pots, just sharp, perfectly trimmed hedges and grey stone. "Welcome home, Bella," Dominic said, as the door opened. Bella unbuckled and hopped out, grabbing Cassidy's hand and pulling her toward the massive oak front doors. "She's eager," Dominic noted, stepping out behind them. "She usually runs to her room and locks the door." As they entered the foyer, which featured a chandelier the size of a small car, an older woman in a severe black dress approached. This was Mrs. Rossi, the housekeeper. She looked at Cassidy with suspicion. "Another one, sir?" Mrs. Rossi asked, eyeing Cassidy's stained waitress uniform. "This one is different, Maria," Dominic said. "Take Bella to get washed up. Show Miss Tate to the guest suite east. Get her some clothes. Burn that uniform." "Yes, sir." As Bella was led away, looking back reluctantly, Dominic turned to Cassidy. The air between them was thick. "Dinner is at 7. Sharp. Dress formally. We have guests coming tonight. My lieutenants." He stepped closer, towering over her. "Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not ask questions about business, and do not leave the grounds. Ever." "Am I a prisoner?" Cassidy asked, a spark of defiance returning. "You are a protected asset," Dominic corrected. "There is a difference. Outside those gates, Mickey O'Shea will have a price on your head by sunset. Inside you are safe, as long as you follow my rules." He turned and walked toward a set of double doors on the left, presumably his office. Cassidy watched him go, a mix of fear and fascination swirling in her chest. 2 hours later, Cassidy stood in front of a floor-length mirror in the guest suite. The room was larger than her entire apartment. Mrs. Rossi had provided a dress, a sleek navy blue silk number that fit surprisingly well. Cassidy looked at her reflection. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like someone who belonged in this world of shadows and silk, but she felt like an imposter. She made her way downstairs at 6:55 p.m. The house was quiet, disturbingly so. She found the dining room a cavernous hall with a table set for 12. Dominic was there, standing by the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch. He was talking to 2 men. One was short and stocky, with a nose that had clearly been broken multiple times, Rocco. The other was younger, handsome, in a slick, oily way, with restless eyes. Enzo. When Cassidy entered, silence fell. Well, Enzo smirked, looking her up and down. "So this is the Joan of Arc who slapped Gavin Thorne." "I didn't slap him," Cassidy said, walking into the light. "I just stopped him from hurting a child." "Same thing to the Irish," Rocco grunted. "Boss, we got word. O'Shea is livid. He's calling a sit-down. He says you disrespected his blood." Dominic took a sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving Cassidy. "Let him call it. I've been looking for an excuse to take the North Side ports anyway." "He's demanding the girl," Enzo said, his voice dropping. "He wants the waitress delivered to him as an apology." Cassidy froze. Dominic smashed his glass into the fireplace. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "He wants what?" Dominic's voice was a low growl. "He says an eye for an eye," Enzo said, looking nervous. "She embarrassed his nephew. He wants to teach her manners." Dominic walked over to Cassidy. He stopped inches from her. She could smell the scotch and the expensive cologne. He reached out his hand, hovering near her face, before he gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. "Tell O'Shea," Dominic said, staring deep into Cassidy's eyes, "that if he comes near her, I will kill every man who bears his last name. She is under my protection. She is Valenti now." Cassidy's breath hitched. "Is that wise, boss?" Enzo asked, a strange glint in his eye. "Over a waitress?" "She's not a waitress," Dominic said, turning to face his men, his body shielding Cassidy. "She's the only person in this city who has more balls than the 2 of you combined. Now sit down. We eat." Dinner was a tense affair. Bella sat next to Cassidy, refusing to eat unless Cassidy took a bite first. Dominic watched them from the head of the table, his expression unreadable. But Cassidy noticed something. Enzo wasn't eating. He was texting under the table, and every time he looked at Dominic, there was a flash of something that looked a lot like resentment. As the plates were cleared, a loud alarm began to blare throughout the house. Red lights flashed in the hallway. "Perimeter breach," Rocco shouted, jumping up and drawing a gun from his waistband. Dominic was on his feet instantly. He moved with terrifying speed, flipping the heavy oak table onto its side to create a barricade. "Get down!" he roared at Cassidy. Glass shattered in the hallway. Automatic gunfire erupted, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. "They're here," Enzo yelled, but he didn't draw his gun. He backed away toward the kitchen door. "Bella!" Cassidy screamed. She grabbed the little girl and dove behind the overturned table, just as bullets chewed up the wood where they had been sitting seconds ago. Dominic was firing back his handgun, booming. "Rocco, cover the east wing. Cassidy, take Bella and get to the panic room in the library. Go!" "I'm not leaving you," Cassidy yelled back. "Go!" Dominic turned to look at her, his eyes wild. "If they get her, they won't." Cassidy grabbed a steak knife from the floor, her only weapon. She pulled Bella up. "Come on, baby, run!" They sprinted toward the library bullets, whizzing past them, shredding the expensive artwork on the walls. Cassidy didn't look back. She ran for her life, holding the hand of the Mafia boss's daughter, realizing too late that the war Dominic had predicted wasn't coming tomorrow. It was already here. The hallway leading to the library was a blur of expensive wallpaper and terrifying shadows. Cassidy's lungs burned. She wasn't an athlete. She was a waitress who smoked occasionally and spent her shifts standing still. But fear was a potent fuel. She gripped Bella's hand so tight her knuckles were white, practically dragging the child across the Persian rugs. "Almost there, Bella. Almost there." Cassidy gasped, though she had no idea if the library doors would even lock. Behind them, the sounds of chaos echoed from the dining room, shouts shattering porcelain, and the distinctive thud, thud, thud of silenced pistols. Dominic was back there, alone, against an army. Cassidy shoved the heavy oak doors of the library open and pulled Bella inside. The room was massive, 2 stories of books, with a spiral staircase and a large mahogany desk. "Hide," Cassidy ordered, pointing to the space behind the massive desk. "Bella, get under there and don't make a sound, no matter what you hear." Bella's eyes were wide, filled with tears, but she obeyed. She scrambled under the desk, curling into a ball. Cassidy turned to lock the door, but before her fingers could touch the brass latch, the door was kicked open. It slammed against the wall with a violence that shook the floorboards. Cassidy stumbled back, raising the steak knife she had stolen from the table. Her hand was shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't a stranger in a ski mask. It was Enzo. Dominic's lieutenant stood in the doorway, panting slightly. He held a black pistol in his right hand. His suit was rumpled, but he was grinning a sick, twisted expression that made him look like a wolf who had finally cornered a lamb. "Going somewhere, sweetheart?" Enzo drawled, stepping into the room and kicking the door shut behind him. "You," Cassidy breathed, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "You set off the alarm. You let them in." "Dominic is getting old," Enzo said, walking slowly toward her. He didn't seem afraid of the steak knife. "He's got a soft spot, bringing a stray cat and her mute kitten into the house, picking fights with the Irish over spilled water. He's weak. Mickey O'Shea promised me the north side if I opened the gates." "He trusted you," Cassidy spat, backing up until her legs hit the edge of the desk. She could feel Bella trembling against her ankles underneath the wood. "Business is business," Enzo shrugged. He raised the gun, aiming it at Cassidy's chest. "Now move aside. O'Shea wants the girl alive. He didn't say anything about you." "No," Cassidy said. Her voice was surprisingly steady. "No," Enzo laughed. "You have a butter knife. I have a 9mm. Do the math." "You'll have to shoot me." Cassidy said, planting her feet. And the noise will bring Dominic. Dominic is dead by now, Enzo sneered. Rocco took a bullet to the throat in the first 5 seconds. It's over. Now move. He lunged forward, not to shoot, but to pistol whip her out of the way. He underestimated her. He saw a waitress. He didn't see a girl who had grown up in the rougher parts of South Chicago, dodging handsy drunks and street thugs her whole life. As Enzo swung the gun, Cassidy didn't flinch away. She ducked into his guard. She slashed out with the steak knife. It wasn't a graceful move, but it was desperate. The serrated blade caught Enzo's forearm, slicing through his expensive suit jacket and into the muscle. "Ah, you bitch!" Enzo roared, dropping the gun as he clutched his bleeding arm. The gun skittered across the floor, sliding under a leather armchair. Enzo's face twisted into pure rage. He backhanded Cassidy with his good arm. The force of the blow sent her spinning. She crashed into a bookshelf, the taste of copper filling her mouth. Her vision swam. "I'm going to kill you slow for that," Enzo hissed, pulling a switchblade from his pocket. He stalked toward her. Cassidy tried to stand, but her legs felt like jelly. She looked toward the desk. Bella was peeking out her eyes, terrified. "I failed," Cassidy thought. "I'm sorry, Bella." Enzo raised the knife. Bang! The sound was deafening in the enclosed room. Enzo stiffened. A look of confusion crossed his face. He looked down at his chest where a small red flower was rapidly blooming on his white shirt. He looked back at the doorway. Dominic Valenti stood there. He looked like a demon rising from hell. His jacket was gone. His white dress shirt was soaked in blood, some of it his, most of it not. He held a smoking handgun in one hand, his arm steady as a rock. "Dominic!" Enzo gurgled blood trickling from his mouth. It was just business." "You touched my family," Dominic said, his voice void of any human emotion. He fired again. A precise shot to the head. Enzo crumpled to the floor dead before he hit the carpet. Dominic didn't even look at the body. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to his knees beside Cassidy. He holstered his gun and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were warm and sticky with blood. "Cassidy!" he demanded, his eyes searching hers frantically. "Look at me. Are you hit?" He hit me," Cassidy mumbled, touching her swelling cheek. "But I'm okay. I'm okay." "Bella." Dominic looked at the desk. The little girl scrambled out and threw herself into Dominic's arms, burying her face in his bloody shirt. Dominic held them both for a second, his breathing ragged. It was the first time Cassidy saw the cracks in his armor. He wasn't just a boss, he was a terrified father. "We have to go," Dominic said, pulling away. "The house is compromised. There are more coming." "Where can we go?" Cassidy asked, letting him pull her to her feet. "They're at the gates." Dominic walked over to a bookshelf filled with encyclopedias. He pulled a specific volume, The History of Rome, and the entire shelf clicked and swung inward. A dark concrete tunnel was revealed. "I built this house for a war," Dominic said, looking back at the ruin of his life. "I just hoped I'd never have to fight it." He grabbed a flashlight from a shelf inside the tunnel. "Move! Don't stop until we see the river." The tunnel was damp, smelling of earth and mold. It ran for nearly a mile underground, bypassing the estate's perimeter and opening up into a drainage ditch near a dense patch of forest. When they emerged, the night air was freezing. Rain had started to fall, a cold Chicago drizzle that soaked them to the bone instantly. Dominic didn't slow down. He led them through the woods to an old, rusted maintenance shed near the highway. Inside, hidden under a tarp, was a nondescript Ford sedan. No armor, no fancy rims. A ghost car. "Get in the back," Dominic ordered, opening the door for Bella and Cassidy. As Cassidy climbed in, she noticed Dominic moving stiffly. When the dome light flickered on for a second, she saw it. A dark stain spreading on his side, just above his hip. "You're shot," Cassidy whispered. "It grazed me." Dominic grunted, slamming the door. He got into the driver's seat and started the engine. "We need to get to the safe house. Keep your heads down." The drive was a blur of neon lights and rain-streaked windows. Dominic drove with one hand on the wheel, his eyes constantly checking the mirrors. They didn't go to a hotel. They didn't go to another mansion. They ended up in the meatpacking district, an industrial wasteland of brick warehouses and silent factories. Dominic pulled the car into an alleyway behind an abandoned textile mill. "Upstairs," he said, his voice tighter now. "Third floor, green door. Key is under the mat." They made it up the creaky stairs. The apartment inside was sparse, a single mattress on the floor, a table, a first aid kit, and a stockpile of canned food. It was a place designed for survival, not living. Once the door was bolted, Dominic collapsed onto the mattress. "Daddy!" Bella let out a silent scream, her mouth open, shaking him. "I'm okay, baby," Dominic wheezed, but his face was grey. "You're not okay," Cassidy said, her survival mode kicking in. She dropped to her knees beside him. "Let me see." She pulled up his blood-soaked shirt. It wasn't a graze. A bullet had torn a furrow through his side. It hadn't hit any organs, but he had lost a lot of blood. "The kit," Dominic pointed to a metal box on the table. "Needles, thread, whiskey." Cassidy grabbed the kit. Her hands, which had been steady enough to slash Enzo, were trembling again. She had never stitched a person up. She had stitched buttons on her waitress uniform. That was it. "I can't do this," she panicked, looking at the raw wound. "You have to," Dominic gritted out. "I can't go to a hospital. They'll be watching. O'Shea owns the unions. He has eyes in the ERs." Dominic uncorked a bottle of cheap whiskey, took a long swig, and then poured the alcohol directly into the wound. He groaned a guttural sound of agony, his back arching off the mattress. Bella hid her face in a pillow, crying silently. "Do it!" Dominic gasped. "Sew it up." Cassidy took a deep breath. She threaded the needle. She thought of her mother, how she had cared for her during dialysis. She thought of the way Gavin had treated her. She thought of how Dominic had looked at her in the restaurant, like she was worth something. She pushed the needle through the skin. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the rain against the window and Dominic's shallow breathing. When she tied the final knot and bandaged him, she felt exhausted, as if she had run a marathon. Dominic lay back, sweat matting his dark hair to his forehead. He looked at her. His eyes were hazy but intense. "You have good hands," he whispered. "I used to want to be a nurse," Cassidy confessed, wiping the blood from her fingers with a wet rag. "Before the bills piled up, before I had to drop out." Dominic reached out and took her hand. His grip was weak but firm. "Why is she silent?" Cassidy asked softly, nodding toward Bella, who had fallen asleep curled up at the foot of the mattress. "Bella, she can hear. She understands everything." "Why doesn't she speak?" Dominic closed his eyes. For a long time, Cassidy thought he had fallen asleep. 2 years ago, Dominic said, his voice rasping. "My wife, Elena. We were in the car. Bella was in the back seat. We were stopped at a light on Wacker Drive." Cassidy held her breath. A motorcycle pulled up. I saw the gun. I dove to cover Bella. Dominic's hand tightened on hers. Elena wasn't fast enough. She took 3 bullets to the chest. Bella. She was covered in her mother's blood. She screamed for 3 hours straight at the police station. And then she just stopped. She hasn't said a word since that day. Tears pricked Cassidy's eyes. "I'm so sorry. I promised her." Dominic opened his eyes, staring at the cracked ceiling. I promised her I would keep her safe, and today I brought the war right to her dinner table. You saved her, Cassidy said fiercely. And you saved me. Dominic turned his head to look at her. The chemistry between them, forged in adrenaline and blood, was undeniable. You saved yourself, Cassidy Tate. I just provided the exit. He paused. But we can't stay here. O'Shea won't stop. He thinks I'm dead or dying. He'll make a move to take over the city within 24 hours. If I don't strike back, I lose everything. My men will scatter. And then he'll come for Bella to finish the bloodline. So what do we do? Cassidy asked. Dominic's eyes hardened. The pain seemed to recede, replaced by cold calculation. We don't run, he said. We hunt. Morning came with a grey, leaden light. The rain had stopped leaving the city scrubbing clean. Dominic was up before Cassidy. She woke to the smell of coffee, instant coffee made on a hot plate, but it smelled like heaven. He was standing by the window, peering through the blinds. He was pale, and he moved gingerly, favoring his left side, but he was dressed in fresh clothes from a duffel bag he'd kept in the safe house. A black t-shirt, dark jeans. He looked less like a Mafia don and more like a brawler. We have a problem, Dominic said, as Cassidy sat up, stretching her stiff muscles. Only one. Cassidy rubbed her eyes. I made some calls on a burner phone. It's bad. The word on the street is that I'm dead. O'Shea is throwing a victory party tonight. He's gathering all the heads of the 5 families at the Emerald Lounge. A victory party? Cassidy scoffed. You're very much alive. They don't know that, and that's our advantage. Dominic turned to her. But I can't get close to the Emerald Lounge. It's an Irish stronghold. Everyone knows my face. Everyone knows my men. If we get within a block, they'll spot us. So you can't get in, Cassidy said, connecting the dots. But you need to know who is loyal to you and who has flipped to O'Shea. Exactly. I need eyes inside. I need to know where O'Shea keeps his ledger, the book with all his corrupt politician payoffs. If I get that book, I can crush him without firing a single bullet. The feds will do the work for me. But you can't go in, Cassidy repeated. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had poured coffee for rude businessmen for 5 years, the hands that were invisible to men like Gavin Thorne. I can, she said. Dominic froze. No. Dominic, listen to me. Cassidy stood up. Nobody knows who I am. To O'Shea, I'm just the waitress. He's never seen my face. Gavin is gone. Enzo is dead. There is no one left who can identify me. It's too dangerous, Dominic growled, walking over to her. O'Shea is a monster. If he finds out who you are. He won't, Cassidy said, stepping closer to him. She felt a strange surge of confidence. I've spent my life being invisible, Dominic. I know how to blend in. I know how to serve drinks and listen to conversations without anyone noticing I'm there. It's what I do. Dominic looked down at her. He looked conflicted. He wanted to protect her, but he knew she was right. It was a suicide mission for him, but a walk in the park for her, if she kept her cool. The Emerald Lounge is hiring for the party tonight, Dominic admitted reluctantly. They need extra staff for the VIP room. Perfect, Cassidy said. I'll go in. I'll wear a wire. I'll find out where the ledger is. If you do this, Dominic said, his voice rough, you are crossing a line you can never uncross. You become an accomplice, a soldier. I crossed that line when I stabbed Enzo, Cassidy reminded him. I'm in Dominic, whether you like it or not. Dominic stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Okay. But we need to change your look. If you're going into the lion's den, you can't look like Cassidy Tate. The transformation took 2 hours. Dominic found a box of supplies in the safe-house bathroom: hair dye, scissors, makeup. Cassidy cut her long, sandy blonde hair into a sharp, chin-length bob and dyed it jet black. She applied heavy dark makeup, changing the contours of her face. She put on a pair of fake glasses. When she turned to face Dominic, he blinked. "You look like someone else," she asked. "Like trouble." He smirked. He handed her a small silver pendant necklace. "This is the microphone. It connects to an earpiece I'll be wearing in the van outside. If you tap it twice, I come in guns blazing. I don't care if the whole Chicago PD is there. Understand?" "I understand." "And Cassidy." Dominic caught her arm as she turned to leave. He pulled her close. The air crackled between them. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a chaste, protective gesture that felt more intimate than anything she had ever experienced. "Come back to me." "I will," she whispered. The Emerald Lounge was pulsating with music. It was a private club in River North, all dark wood and green velvet. Cassidy, now Veronica, according to her fake ID, walked through the service entrance. The head bartender, a burly man named Mick, barely glanced at her. "You the agency girl?" Mick grunted. "Yeah." "Veronica," she said, chewing gum, adopting a bored Southside accent she'd heard 1,000 times on the L train. "Grab a tray. VIP room is upstairs. Champagne only. Don't look Mr. O'Shea in the eye. Don't speak unless spoken to. And if you spill anything, you die. Got it?" "Got it," Cassidy said. She picked up a tray of crystal flutes and headed for the stairs. Her heart was thumping, a techno beat against her ribs. "I can do this," she told herself. "I'm just a waitress. Just a waitress." She pushed open the double doors to the VIP room. The smoke was thick. Sitting at the center table, laughing loudly, was a man Cassidy recognized from the news, Mickey O'Shea. He was obese, red-faced and sweating, holding a cigar the size of a sausage. Around him sat men in suits, rival bosses, crooked cops and corrupt aldermen. "So I told Valenti," O'Shea roared, slamming his hand on the table. "I told him you touch my blood, you pay in blood. Now look at him. Worm food." The room erupted in laughter. Cassidy moved through the crowd offering drinks. She made herself small, hunching her shoulders, keeping her eyes down. She reached O'Shea's table. "Champagne, sir," she mumbled. "Leave the bottle." O'Shea grunted, not looking at her. He was too busy gesturing to a man sitting next to him, a man with a briefcase, handcuffed to his wrist. "The ledger is safe, right, Miller? I don't want any loose ends." "It's tight, Mickey," the man named Miller said. "But we should move it to the vault at the bank tomorrow. Keeping it here is risky." "Tonight we celebrate," O'Shea yelled. "Tomorrow we bank." Bingo, Cassidy thought. Briefcase, handcuffs, the man on the right. She turned to leave her mission accomplished. She just needed to get to the bathroom and whisper the info to Dominic. But as she turned, a hand grabbed her wrist. It wasn't O'Shea. It was a man sitting in the shadows in the corner. A man Cassidy hadn't noticed. He stood up. He was tall, thin, with a face like a rat. "Wait a minute," the man said, peering at her through the smoke. "You look familiar." Cassidy froze. Her blood turned to ice. "I just have one of those faces," she said, trying to pull away. "No," the man said, tightening his grip. He squinted. "I was at the Gilded Spoon yesterday for lunch. I saw the waitress who started all this." The room went quiet. O'Shea stopped laughing. "What did you say?" O'Shea asked, looking at the man. "It's her," the man said, his eyes widening. "She dyed her hair, but that's the bitch who slapped your nephew." O'Shea stood up slowly. The jovial mood evaporated, replaced by a terrifying violence. "Is that so?" O'Shea walked around the table, stopping inches from Cassidy. He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "You got a lot of nerve coming here, little girl." Cassidy tapped the pendant twice. Click, click. "I'm not a little girl," Cassidy said, dropping the accent. She stared O'Shea in the eye. "I'm the distraction." "The distraction?" Mickey O'Shea sneered, raising his heavy hand to strike her. "You think you're funny, you're dead." But before the blow could land, the world exploded. The floor-to-ceiling window disintegrated inward with a deafening boom. A flashbang grenade blinded the room in searing white light, followed instantly by the roar of gunfire. "Secure the target. Get the ledger." Dominic Valenti led the charge. He rappelled through the shattered window landing amidst the glass, like a dark avenger. He wasn't wearing body armor. He was fueled by pure rage. Moving with terrifying precision, he dropped 2 of O'Shea's bodyguards before they could even unholster their weapons. "Kill him!" O'Shea screamed, overturning the heavy oak table to use as a shield. He dragged Miller, the accountant, handcuffed to the briefcase behind cover with him. Dominic was exposed. A surviving guard in the corner raised a shotgun, aiming directly at Dominic's back. "Behind you!" Cassidy screamed. She grabbed a jagged shard of glass from the carpet and threw it with everything she had. It struck the guard in the face, causing him to flinch. His shot went wide, blasting a hole in the ceiling. Dominic spun, saw the threat, and put 2 bullets in the man's chest. He locked eyes with Cassidy for a split second, a look of intense pride before vaulting a sofa to advance on O'Shea. "It's over, Mickey! Give me the book!" Dominic roared, pinned down by O'Shea's wild return fire. Cassidy saw her chance. While O'Shea was focused on Dominic, the accountant, Miller, was trembling on the floor, trying to unlock the briefcase. Cassidy didn't run for safety. She ran for the leverage. She lunged at Miller, grabbing the briefcase handle. "Give it to me!" She gritted out, yanking it violently. O'Shea turned at the noise. He saw Cassidy wrestling for the ledger that held all his secrets. His eyes went wide with fury. He turned his gun away from Dominic and aimed it point-blank at Cassidy's head. "Goodbye, Waitress," O'Shea snarled. He pulled the trigger. Click. The hammer fell on an empty chamber. O'Shea had fired his last round at Dominic. A look of pure horror washed over the mob boss's face. Dominic stepped out from behind the pillar. He didn't rush. He walked calmly, leveling his pistol at O'Shea's forehead. "Her name," Dominic said, his voice terrifyingly quiet, "is Cassidy." Bang! Mickey O'Shea fell backward. The reign of the Irish mob ended in a single second. As the tactical team secured the room, Cassidy stood amidst the debris chest, heaving, clutching the briefcase. Dominic holstered his gun and walked to her. He didn't ask if she was okay. He grabbed her face and kissed her, a fierce, desperate kiss that tasted of survival. "I told you to wait for the signal," he murmured against her lips. "I improvised," she whispered. Dominic looked at the briefcase. "With that book, we own this city. The war is over, Cassidy. Let's go home to Bella." 3 years later, the garden of the Valenti estate was no longer a fortress of cold stone. It was blooming with wild roses and hydrangeas. Cassidy sat on the sunlit patio sipping iced tea. She wore a white sundress, her hand resting gently on the rounded curve of her stomach. Their son was due in the winter. She watched the lawn where a massive oak tree now held a tire swing. Dominic was there, his shirt sleeves rolled up, pushing the swing. On it sat Bella. She was 10 now, her hair blowing in the wind, laughing with a joy that filled the air. "Higher, Daddy, higher!" Bella shrieked. "Hold on tight, Principessa!" Dominic laughed, pushing her toward the sky. Cassidy smiled, tears pricking her eyes. Bella had started speaking 3 months after the raid. Her first word hadn't been "Daddy." It had been Cassidy. Since that night at the lounge, Dominic had used the ledger to clean house. He had dismantled the corrupt networks and ensured no bullies like Gavin Thorne could ever prey on the weak again. He ruled the city, not with fear, but with a code of honor. Dominic walked up the steps, wiping sweat from his brow. He kissed Cassidy deeply, placing a hand on her baby bump. "I'm proud of you," he said softly, looking at the peace they had built. "I'm just a retired waitress," Cassidy teased. "No," Dominic corrected her, watching his daughter play. "You're the woman who saved us." Cassidy leaned her head on his shoulder, listening to the laughter of her family. She thought about the day she dropped the tray at the restaurant, the fear and the uncertainty, and she realized she wouldn't change a single second of it. And that is the end of Cassidy and Dominic's journey, from a waitress defending a mute girl to the Queen of Chicago. Cassidy proved that true strength is about standing up when everyone else looks away. If you loved the ending, especially Bella getting her voice back, please smash that like button. Let's aim for 5,000 likes. Don't forget to subscribe and comment Valenti Legacy if you want a sequel about their son. Thanks for watching.